All right, so now let's talk about the competitions committee responsibilities. This is different than the handicap committee. All right, now a lot of times this is just going to be the professional staff. I certainly understand that. So, may set maximum limit of play in the terms of the competition for a maximum handicap index, a minimum, maximum for entry. A maximum handicap index for a player permitted to use, a maximum course handicap, playing handicap, clearly they're different, and what revision date index to use. So let's think about this from, how many events that you have a minimum handicap index to reach, maximum, whatever the case may be. I would say some of you have this, you might not have more than an 18.0 from a member guest. All that needs to be calculated into what you're putting out towards the folks that are playing. And then as far as what revision date index to use, I think what we're probably going to end up doing in 2020 is we're going to do most of our paperwork ideally the Friday before our Monday events. So that's probably the index that we're going to pull Friday morning. Because we're still going to start printing, we're still going to print material. As soon as we go away from printing a scorecard the day of the event and we have 100% immersion with the mobile app, then we're going to run with what it is that morning. Not everybody's going to have that opportunity. Again, if you don't have to print something and all you have to do is hit one button to update a handicap index and it gets applied to everything else, and people are going to put their scores on something that's not a printed material, the logistics get a little bit easier. Kind of up to whatever you would think makes sense.
All going to be in the drop-down box. Have you seen any of that?
Yeah. So the question is, how does Golf Genius, which I think most of you probably use in this market, how is it going to be effective? What are the changes going to look like? You're clearly going to have a drop-down for what date the handicap index to use and lock in place, which you kind of already have. You already have the option to change the handicap index, or the percentage of the course handicap throughout the system.
Was there going to be a default now based on?
There's not going to be a default because realize that these are all recommendations.
Okay.
These are all recommendations. All right, so these are just examples of what you essentially will see from a terms of competition, who, what, where, why. All these things should be considered when you start putting your golf course competition schedule together. The committee in charge of the competition may reserve the right to adjust a playing handicap of an interest within its terms of competition where there is evidence that the player's handicap index does not reflect the demonstrated ability. So, member guest, you have a member, a guest of a member that comes over. Clearly, he needs to have an adjustment. You can adjust it for that event. Clearly, people aren't going to be happy, but that is within your purview because it's not your. Remember, the home course dynamic is part of that as well. So the home course handicap committee of the home course should handle the responsibility of adjusting that player's handicap index. Clearly, they don't all do. So they end up your problem because they're now at your facility. So that is certainly something that the competitions committee can handle. And then from a multiple round standpoint, it's kind of up to you as to consecutive days. It's strongly recommended that term of competition is introduced to state that the handicap index used at the start of the competition should be used for the duration of the event for ease of competition administration purposes. Scores should still be posted by the end of each day. So in a situation when a new round is played before the player's handicap index has been updated, again, this is a 36-hole day, the committee in charge of the competition or the handicap committee has the discretion to decide the playing handicap the player should use. So, you could make an adjustment, between rounds if it so makes sense. And I could see maybe in a member guest you might want to, make an adjustment halfway through. Just say, we're going to review it. If something happens, we're going to change it, and that's after the first round. I could see that working. Yeah. Okay. So again, we talked about the handicap allowances. Again, this is a salmon colored sheet. All right, and again, it's rounded up from 0.5. All right. Hopefully you can find that within Golf Genius. That's also why there's a piece of paper in that folder. Throw that in your folder and throw that in your desk. Yeah. Okay. Miami Valley Golf Responsibilities. This is a little different. In order for the World Handicap System, the association is authorized by the USGA and the RDA. All these kind of things basically flow downward. So it's authorized National Golf Association, and it's issued index either directly or delegated through a golf club. So we can issue directly, or it goes through the golf club, which we've been doing for a few years. That really hasn't changed. Okay, so stroke index allocation, the old handicap hole allocation component. The rules of handicapping will recommend using the course rating data to rank the holes for stroke index allocation. The recommendation is to allocate old strokes on the front and even strokes on the back. Specific strokes will be allocated using 3-hole clusters with 1 and 2 strokes in the middle cluster. Now, this is a recommendation, all right? So you can essentially see what's happening here, and this is done using the course rating data. All right, so clearly if I'm a scorecard manufacturer, 2020 could be a hot year for me, all right? I would say that this is a recommendation. You know, there are situations where the middle of the golf course is clearly not going to need something that the 6th hole might be, you know, might not be the right spot. So these are recommendations. Our default is going to essentially push this into the handicap system. It's not going to go into Golf Genius because that is facility managed as far as the course data, as it should be, because you're going to have north and south playing together and all these other sort of things. But this is what we're going to essentially see as we start the new year. And for those that came to our course meeting, we will have essentially a document that say this is what you currently have, this is what it's going to, and what do you want it to be. If you don't tell us, it's going to be what the course rating data tells us to be. That's kind of what we've gotten from the pundits above. Really won't be a problem. I'll call Neil. Heather would say, what do you want to do? Well, the committee thinks we just keep what we have. And then the next time we get a new course rating, we'll go to whatever it is. And, you know, that's kind of the process. But, anyhow, if you really think about it, how you did it at your facility was a little more subjective than objective, you know, because you're taking 200 scores from an A group and 200 scores from a C group, and you're comparing the two of them, and what time of year is it, and all these other sort of things. Now you have some more consistent application for what those stroke index allocations are. Any questions on that? I don't know if any of you start thinking about that. Okay, so certain procedures should be considered to allocate both stroke play and match play formats, including, you know, all these kind of things, and obviously you'll have this material. Now we also have the situation where we're adjudicating par, and again, as soon as you start getting into the 440-yard range, we on 5 or 6 at NCR would be a great example of that. That may be still considered a par 5 because that's what the primary tee would be. It basically doesn't take the stroke away from the person who's moved up a forward set of tees. Any thoughts on that? I know some of you have been in, probably had this in your head for at least 2 or 3 weeks now. Kind of, that's what we're kind of thinking as far as at the end of the day. So apparently we have final say in this dispute. So if you have one group that says, well, you know, 340-yard par 5 doesn't make sense for anyone, you know, we would have to figure that out. I don't think this is going to be a big deal. Okay, so temporary ratings for unset. This happens kind of frequently, frankly. When a tee has not been rated, the following protocol is to be used. Locate the nearest set of rated tees for the appropriate gender. Determine the major difference between the set of tees being played and the rated set of tees. For differences under 100 yards, there's no adjustment necessary. So if you just move the tee up to the front of the fairway on one hole, clearly that's not 100 yards in most cases, so you don't need an adjustment. If you're rebuilding a tee and you need to move it forward, it's going to be that way for a month, there's not going to be adjustment necessary. But if it's between 100 and 300, then they'll have a table which will be in this document. I think it's in that document now. All right. And then clearly, if there's a permanent change within the golf course, clearly we're going to have to do a re-rating if necessary. And if it's just one hole, we may just re-rate that one hole based on whatever the conditions are in effect. Before we break, any questions? Yes?
Steve, back to the home course where you have to dedicate where a member
Sure.
has multiple, they have to dedicate the home course. Do they have to pay for 2 gin cards if you're a member of 2 different locations?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's a great question. I get it all the time. And particularly when you go from one state to another. What you have to realize is, one, from one state to another, that's a different tax ID number, that's a different business. We survive on that income. We pay one fee back to USJ, but it's a percentage of that. Now, let's say that we have a member at Eaton and Miami Valley Golf Club, which I'm sure you have a number of them like that, right? Who do I bill for what? And who administers that at your place? And who administers that at Miami Valley? That's why we do that. Now, there will come a day, I hope, that that's not a concern. But as of right now, that's the system we have. Great question.
Will we be getting into Florida versus Ohio and how those scores are going to interact? Because I guess we're taking effect January, but in Florida, that's the last meeting we talked, they're not going to take effect until later, a later date for the World Handicap System.
No, so your question was, when does this take place, in Ohio compared to Florida? So, Florida, it takes effect on January 1st. The system basically goes quiet for 6 or 7 days and then goes live again, and you post all those scores. There are different parts of the world that will be rolling into it at different times. So if you have an August trip to Scotland, it's not going to be part of the World Handicap System, so you don't have a postable score. If you have a September trip, you do. All right, so those are kind of things. All right. Realize we got all kinds of options for us as far as inventory distribution. All these things are out there. Hopefully that you will do that.